It was around 10 o'clock at night on May 24th, 1997, when Eric Clemens called the livery cab to take him to 276 Marion Street in Brooklyn, New York. Clemens was on his way to see his girlfriend, Lisa Tony, or so he thought. But what Eric Clemens did not know, ladies and gentlemen, was that the livery cab that picked him up that night was driving him right into the middle of a death trap. At the end of the block on Marion Street, sitting in a dark park, were the defendants Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne. Together with Charles Thomas, they were sitting and waiting for Clemens to arrive on the block. When Clemens finally drove past them that night, Charles Thomas and Adrian Payne sprung into action. With guns drawn, they ran down Marion Street towards the livery cab. The defendant, Tyrone Hunter, who was acting as the getaway driver that night, began to pull their car forward. As Clemens readied himself to get out of the cab, the defendant, Adrian Payne, quickly neared the rear passenger's side of the cab where Clemens was seated, and he began to shoot. When Charles Thomas reached the opposite side of the cab a few moments later, he was prepared to shoot as well, but he held his fire for fear of catching Adrian Payne in the crossfire. But as you will learn, ladies and gentlemen, all that it took that night was one shooter. The defendant, Adrian Payne, shot at Eric Clemens again and again and again until Eric Clemens' body was riddled with bullets, until Eric Clemens lay slumped and bleeding in the back of the livery cab. And when the job was done, Adrian Payne and Charles Thomas ran for the getaway car, where Tyrone Hunter was sitting behind the wheel to whisk them away. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence of this trial will not only tell you, will prove to you how Adrian Payne and Tyrone Hunter murdered Eric Clemens. The evidence will tell you why. As you will learn, Clemens was murdered because he violated the rules, the unwritten rules of a violent and ruthless criminal enterprise, an enterprise that Adrian Payne and Tyrone Hunter and many others considered their family, a family of gun-toting, murderous drug dealers and robbers. You will learn that the rules of that criminal enterprise were very simple. Don't disrespect them or their brothers. Don't harm them or their livelihood, because if you do, you will suffer the brutal and often deadly consequences. The evidence will show you that time and time again, those who violated those rules were beaten, shot at, or, like Eric Clemens, ruthlessly murdered. You will learn that when Adrian Payne pumped bullet after bullet into Eric Clemens on the night of May 24th, 1997, it was because he had violated virtually every rule in the book. Clemens had disrespected Charles Thomas, an enterprise leader, and he had disrespected the enterprise. It all began when Clemens got caught cheating with Charles Thomas's wife. When Thomas told the defendants Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne about what had happened, they were outraged, and they quickly began to tally up Clemens's other rules violations. Clemens had not only disrespected an enterprise leader, he had been stealing from the enterprise drug spot where he was working, and he was suspected of having cooperated with the police in a criminal case up in Albany, New York. In short, he was a snitch, a thief, and a cheat. It was decided that Clemens would have to pay for his life, with his life, for those violations. Once the decision was made, Charles Thomas spoke to Clemens's girlfriend, Lisa Tony, and found out when she expected Clemens home that night. Thomas, Payne, and Hunter then gathered the necessary tools to carry out the murder. Together, they went to a sporting goods store to buy gloves that would conceal their fingerprints. Charles Thomas secured a handgun. Tyrone Hunter borrowed about the getaway car from his girlfriend and retrieved a .45 caliber handgun from a friend's house, a gun that he had lent to Adrian Payne that night. After all the preparations were made, the defendants Tyrone Hunter, Adrian Payne, and Charles Thomas set their murderous plan into motion, a plan that left Eric Clemens riddled with bullets in the back of a livery cab. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christina Duggar, and I'm an assistant United States attorney here in Brooklyn. Seated with me at counsel table is Scott Morvillo, who is also an assistant United States attorney. Seated next to him is Jason Buthorn, an inspector with the United States Postal Inspection Service. And next to him is John Perfetti, a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, which is also known as the DEA. Together, we represent the United States of America in this case. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the murder of Eric Clemens is not the only crime that you are going to hear about during the course of this trial. You will also hear about the day-to-day operations of the enterprise's lucrative drug business, a drug business that sold millions of dollars of crack cocaine and powder cocaine at multiple drug spots throughout Brooklyn for almost 20 years, a drug operation that filled the defendants' pockets with cash that they laundered through a business that they formed together in 1999, a business that was funded by the proceeds of drug dealing and robberies. You're also going to learn that this enterprise protected and promoted its drug business with violence, with intimidation, with guns and rifles, revolvers, and semi-automatics. Guns were tools of the trade, an essential part of the criminal enterprise and an essential part of their drug business, because, ladies and gentlemen, in the world inhabited by these defendants, if there was trouble, no one called the NYPD. They handled it themselves. They handled it with guns, and they handled it with violence. As you will learn, ladies and gentlemen, the enterprise protected its drug territory from rival drug dealers by any means necessary. They used guns and violence to keep competing dealers from selling in their territory and stealing their customers. Indeed, you're going to hear that on May 28, 1994, the defendant Tyrone Hunter did just that. At around 11 o'clock that morning, Hunter approached McKinley Faulkner on a sidewalk on a street in Brooklyn. Faulkner was a drug dealer who Hunter believed was selling crack cocaine in the vicinity of the enterprise's drug spot. Now, in the drug world, there is a simple rule. You can't sell drugs on a corner, a block, a street that belongs to another drug dealer. That morning, McKinley Faulkner was standing smack dab in the middle of the enterprise's drug territory on Classen Avenue in Brooklyn. When Tyrone Hunter approached Faulkner, he wasted no time. After exchanging a few words with him, Hunter fired at him with a 9mm handgun at close range. A bullet pierced Faulkner's leg, and he fell to the ground as Hunter fled the scene. Now, although McKinley Faulkner survived that shooting, defendant Tyrone Hunter had sent to him a clear, unmistakable message. Stay out of the enterprise's drug territory, or you will suffer the bloody consequences. I've already told you how violence was used to deal with suspected police informant Eric Clemens. During this trial, you're going to hear about the brutal assault of another police informant named Stanley McCall. In January of 2003, Adrian Payne began to suspect that McCall was telling law enforcement officials about the enterprise's drug operation on Hageman Avenue in Brooklyn. Those suspicions led to a swift and brutal assault. Payne and others went to McCall's house and lured him outside. When McCall got out onto the street, they viciously beat him until they broke his face, and just in case McCall didn't get the message, Adrian Payne told him in no uncertain terms that if he continued to work with the police, they would kill him. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is going to take you behind the scenes into a world that was inhabited by these defendants, the world of their criminal family, and you're going to see that it was a world filled with drugs, with guns, with violence, and with murder. One of the first things you're going to learn when you step behind the scenes into their world is that virtually everyone who knew the defendants, Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne, knew them by their nicknames. You will learn that Tyrone Hunter was often called Black or T-Black, and that Adrian Payne went by the nickname Egg. What else are you going to learn when you go behind the scenes, ladies and gentlemen? Well, the evidence is going to take you back in times, way back to late 1985 and early 1986, when Tyrone Hunter first drew the attention of John Hatcher, one of the enterprise's leaders and founders. Impressed with Tyrone Hunter's toughness and fearlessness, John Hatcher put him to work as a lookout to look out for police at one of the enterprise's drug spots. The defendant, Tyrone Hunter, moves quickly through ranks of the organization. He was soon promoted to be a manager at a drug spot located on Montauk and Belmont Avenues in the East New York section of Brooklyn. As you will learn, ladies and gentlemen, defendant Tyrone Hunter was not only tough and fearless, he was also ambitious. So, in the summer of 1987, in an effort to further impress John Hatcher, Tyrone Hunter went out and acquired a new enterprise drug spot located on the corner of Glenmore and Hendricks Avenues. The only catch was that another drug dealer named Carol Fetty had also laid claim to that spot. On the afternoon of August 30th, 1987, Tyrone Hunter went to check on the new drug spot. Alan Goines, a member of the enterprise who was nicknamed Wiener, went with Hunter that day. When Hunter and Goines arrived at the corner, they ran into Carol Fetty, who had just pulled up with a carload of his friends. An argument quickly broke out about who controlled the drug spot, and the fight began to escalate. The defendant, Tyrone Hunter, drew a gun, and he started shooting. Hunter shot Carol again and again and again. When the impact of the initial gunshots knocked Carol Fetty to the ground, Tyrone Hunter put one more bullet in the back of his skull. Now, when Tyrone Hunter reported back to John Hatcher that he had killed Carol Fetty, Hatcher was once again impressed. Impressed with Tyrone Hunter's ruthlessness and commitment to the enterprise. Tyrone Hunter was primed to rise up even further in the organization. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show you that instead of feeling confident about his future, Tyrone Hunter began to worry. He was worried about Alan Goines. He suspected that Alan Goines, who had witnessed him kill Carol Fetty, was cooperating with the police. 8 days after the murder of Carol Fetty, Tyrone Hunter's right-hand man, Ira Lewis, who was also known as Shorty, told Alan Goines to report to the Enterprise drug spot located on Montauk and Pitkin Avenues. When Goines arrived at the spot, he encountered several Enterprise members, including Tyrone Hunter. They were waiting for him. They accused him of being a snitch. They tied him to a chair and proceeded to beat him, stab him, and drench him with rubbing alcohol, and then they set him on fire. Goines was screaming in agony. Eventually, somebody put out the fire, dousing him with a bucket of urine that served as a makeshift toilet in a drug spot with no plumbing. They quickly realized that Goines had been severely burned, but he was still alive. The defendant, Tyrone Hunter, summoned John Hatcher to the drug spot to help him figure out what to do about Alan Goines. Now, when John Hatcher arrived at the drug spot, it became immediately clear to him that they could not bring Goines to the hospital without drawing serious police scrutiny. His injuries were too gruesome and too extensive. Hatcher decided that they had to finish what they had started. They had to make sure Goines would not live to tell what they had done to him. A dog chain was placed around Goines' neck, and together Tyrone Hunter, John Hatcher, and the others who were there that day all took hold of the chain, and they strangled Alan Goines. When they thought Goines was dead, Hatcher ordered 2 young workers from the drug spot to dispose of his body. The workers, Kelvin Singleton and Gilberto Wilson, who was also known as Master Bill, put Goines' body in the back of a car and drove away. As they were driving, however, they were surprised Goines was still alive. He popped up in the back seat. He had been stabbed, beaten, burned, and strangled, but he was still alive. Seeing a police car in the area, Goines stuck his head out the window and began to scream for help. In an effort to stop him, Gilberto Wilson turned and shot him twice with a handgun. Goins fell from the car and into the street. The police responded, and Wilson and Singleton panicked, crashing their car and fleeing the scene. Now, when news came back that Goins was still alive, it was troubling, especially to Tyrone Hunter. Hunter had already been concerned that Goins was telling the police about the murder of Carol Fetty. Now, after being beaten, stabbed, burned, strangled, and shot, any loyalty that Goins had to Hunter or the Enterprise was surely gone. There could be little doubt that Goins was going to tell the police everything. In the following weeks, Enterprise leaders were approached by Tyrone Johnson and Joseph Bagley, two gangsters from the Cypress Housing Project. Johnson and Bagley indicated that they knew where Goins was, and they offered to kill him for a fee of $5,000. Before agreeing to the murder contract, John Hatcher consulted with the defendant, Tyrone Hunter. Hunter, who believed Goins was the only witness against him in the Carol Fetty murder, told Hatcher to go ahead and have Goins killed. The money was put up for the murder contract. In the following weeks, word was sent back by Joseph Bagley and Tyrone Johnson that the contract had been fulfilled. Goins had been murdered, shot 4 times on Thanksgiving Day in 1987, and left for dead on a desolate road in Brooklyn. He could no longer be a witness against Tyrone Hunter. Ladies and gentlemen, during the course of this trial, you're going to hear about another murder. The murder of Todd Carson. Like Eric Clemens, Todd Carson was murdered because he violated the rules. In the weeks before he got killed, Carson was in a nightclub when he got into an argument with the defendant, Tyrone Hunter. The argument turned into a fight, and Tyrone Hunter smashed a champagne bottle over Todd Carson's head. Todd Carson was furious, and he decided to retaliate. Shortly after the fight at the nightclub, Carson and his crew went to the Enterprise's drug spot, located on Georgia and Hageman Avenues. They went looking for Hunter and his crime family. When they got there, Carson and his crew opened up fire on the block. Enterprise members were hit, including Charles Thomas, who was shot in the foot. After the shooting, Tyrone Hunter and Charles Thomas met to discuss Carson's fate. Carson had shot Charles Thomas, and he had shot at the Enterprise's drug spot, its bread and butter. He had violated the rules. Tyrone Hunter and Charles Thomas decided that Carson had to die. On October 11th of 1991, Tyrone Hunter and Charles Thomas armed themselves and went looking for Todd Carson. Charles Thomas had been told that Carson was expected to be at the corner of Autumn and Etna Avenues in Brooklyn to do a drug deal. When Hunter and Thomas drove by that corner, they saw Todd Carson, together with his brother Troy, standing on the corner. Hunter and Thomas drove to the next block, parked their car, and doubled back to the corner. They agreed that Tyrone Hunter would go after Todd Carson, while Charles Thomas would be responsible for killing his brother Troy. When they reached Autumn and Etna, they discovered that Troy Carson had gone into the deli that was located on that corner. Charles Thomas laid in wait for Troy Carson to come out of the deli, hiding behind a dumpster near the entrance. Meanwhile, the defendant, Tyrone Hunter, went after Todd Carson. When Carson saw Tyrone Hunter approaching, he began to run. Hunter chased after him, gun in hand. Carson ran towards the livery cab that had been waiting for him and dove inside, but he was not fast enough. Tyrone Hunter caught him, and trapped inside the livery cab with nowhere to go, Todd Carson was an easy target for Tyrone Hunter. Hunter fired his 9mm handgun at Carson again and again and again. In the firestorm, Hunter not only hit Carson, one of his bullets also struck the cab driver. After the deed was done, Tyrone Hunter ran to the getaway car. Charles Thomas, who was still waiting for Troy Carson to come out of deli, saw Hunter fleeing. When Hunter called for Thomas to follow him, he abandoned the plan to kill Troy Carson and ran to the getaway car with Hunter. The two quickly left the scene of the crime, leaving Tyrone. leaving Todd Carson in the back of the cab with a bullet in his head, 3 bullets in his chest. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what other crimes are you going to learn about during this trial? Well, you'll hear that drug dealing was not the only way that Enterprise members made money. They were also robbers who robbed other criminals. And, as you will learn, robbing other criminals can be quite a profitable business, because if you rob another robber, or if you rob a drug dealer, they were not likely to call the NYPD to report the crime. During the trial, you will hear testimony about the robbery of Tacoma Kinsey in 1998, a robbery that the defendant Adrian Payne set up and executed in order to make up for his own rules violation. What rule had Adrian Payne violated? Well, he had failed to include Tyrone Hunter, his fellow Enterprise member, his brother in crime, in the theft of a large sum of money from a local Kmart. Although Hunter had made clear his intention and his interest in being part of that scheme, Payne committed the crime without him. Instead of Tyrone Hunter, it was Tacoma Kinsey who walked into a Kmart with Payne on April 5th of 1998, posing as employees of an armored car company, there for the daily pickup. Payne and Kinsey made off with over $100,000 in cash and checks. After splitting the money with a third man who had planned the crime, Payne and Kinsey each took home $30,000 in cash for their days' work. The audacious caper made the evening news, and when Tyrone Hunter found out that the crime had been committed without him, he was furious. Wanting to make up for the violation, defendant Adrian Payne agreed to go with Tyrone Hunter and another friend to rob Tacoma Kinsey of his Kmart proceeds. That night, defendants Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne armed themselves and traveled to the apartment that Tacoma Kinsey shared with his sister, Dawana Kinsey, who was also Adrian Payne's girlfriend at the time. When they got there, Kinsey was sound asleep. Tyrone Hunter jumped on Kinsey and began to violently hit him in the head with the gun. Hunter demanded to know where the money was. When Kinsey refused to say, they tied him up and ransacked his bedroom. The stash was quickly discovered in the closet. Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne made off with roughly $30,000 in cash, as well as a shotgun and the keys to Tacoma Kinsey's car. Ladies and gentlemen, during the course of this trial, you are also going to learn about another robbery, the robbery of a novice drug dealer named Pedro Newton, a robbery that ended with Newton's murder. In January of 2000, Pedro Newton approached his old schoolhood friend, Charles Thomas, about a drug deal. Newton, who was a New York City bus driver, had a quantity of heroin for sale, and he thought Thomas might want it. Although Thomas, who was a crack dealer himself, was not interested in buying the heroin, he helped Pedro Newton broker a deal with Enterprise associates Richard Dunham and Henry Harley. Unlike Thomas, Dunham and Harley were heroin dealers. When Newton came back and reported that he had a second batch of heroin for sale, the Enterprise members began to plot. Newton was an inexperienced player in the drug game, and he was an easy mark. They plotted to rob Newton of his drugs, and they plotted to kill him. They feared that if they robbed Newton, his heroin suppliers would come back and retaliate against them. It was decided that they could not afford to have Pedro Newton live to tell about the robbery. On the day that Newton was to deliver the second round of heroin, the defendant Adrian Payne and John Hatcher were waiting for him in the basement of an Enterprise drug spot located at 510 Hegeman Avenue. After Charles Thomas led Newton down into the basement, the defendant Adrian Payne put a gun to Newton's head, forcing him to the ground. As Adrian Payne kept the gun trained to Newton's head, John Hatcher emerged from the boiler room of that basement and fired a single bullet into the back of Pedro Newton's head. Payne, Hatcher, and Thomas, and another Enterprise member, wrapped Newton's body in a blanket and plastic bags. They placed the body in the trunk of Newton's car. The car and Newton's body were left in the parking lot of a nearby housing project. The defendant, Adrian Payne, together with John Hatcher and Charles Thomas, took the robbery proceeds, about 600 grams of heroin, to their associates Richard Dunham and Henry Harley and sold it, dividing the profits, roughly $30,000, between themselves. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have told you now what it is that the government will prove, but I want to take a few more minutes of your time to tell you how we will prove it. During the trial, you're going to hear and see a lot of evidence. You're going to hear in-depth first-hand testimony about the inner workings of the enterprise and this family of murdering, robbing drug dealers, about the membership and organization of that enterprise, about its tactics, about the money it made selling drugs and robbing other criminals, about the shootings and the murders that were committed to protect and promote the enterprise and its membership. And how are you going to hear and learn all that kind of inside, in-depth information? Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear it on some occasions from the mouths of the enterprise members, some of the very people who were involved in committing crimes with the defendants, Adrian Payne and Tyrone Hunter. These witnesses will bring you behind the scenes, inside the heart of this criminal enterprise that these defendants belong to. Two of the witnesses that you're going to hear from are John Hatcher and Charles Thomas. You will hear from them about how the enterprise operated and protected its drug business. You will hear about the murders and robberies and the violence that they committed with these two defendants, their brothers in crime. You will not like these witnesses. No one is asking you to like them. No one is expecting you to like them. They have bought and sold illegal drugs. They have committed terrible, violent crimes. They are murderers, and they are in jail because of those crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, these witnesses are not coming into this courtroom because they feel like they have some sort of civic or moral obligation to do so. They will all tell you that they are here for one reason and one reason only, and that is they hope to help themselves. They are hoping that if they provide the information that they have about the enterprise and these defendants when they take that witness stand, that the judge in their case may give them a little bit less time than they have to serve in prison. Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about whether you like these witnesses or not. It's not a personality contest. It's a federal criminal trial, and the government is here to present you with the evidence that has been gathered, and these witnesses are being called to testify because they have valuable information about the criminal enterprise and these two defendants. All that the government is asking you to do is to sit in this jury box and to listen to what they have to say. Listen critically to their testimony. Consider it carefully. Scrutinize it. Listen to them as they tell you all that they saw and heard, and compare it with all the other evidence that is brought before you. See how their testimony fits in, is supported by all of that other evidence. What other evidence? Well, you're going to see photographs and review documents. You're going to examine ballistics evidence. You're going to hear from law enforcement officers. You're going to hear from crime scene specialists and a medical examiner. You will hear about numerous police seizures of guns and drugs from the defendants and the enterprise stash houses. There will be testimony about police raids at two such stash houses in May of 1990, a raid in which Tyrone Hunter was found under a bed with a shotgun, a raid that resulted in the seizure of thousands of vials of crack cocaine and an arsenal of weapons and ammunition. And, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from eyewitnesses to some of the murders that I've just described. Eyewitnesses who watched Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne commit murder. They will come into this courtroom and take that witness stand, and they will tell you what they saw. Now, if you've heard and seen all the evidence in this case, ladies and gentlemen, the government will have another opportunity to speak to you. We'll review all of the evidence with you at that time. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we will ask you to return a verdict that is compelled by the evidence in this case, and that is that the defendants, Tyrone Hunter and Adrian Payne, are guilty as charged. Thank you for your attention.